Welcome into OutKick the show. I'm your fearless leader, Clay Travis. I hope all of you are having fantastic Tuesdays wherever you may be across this great country or around the world. As I am speaking to you, I can see the Fox News feed here of Karine Jean-Pierre getting filleted. We're going to talk a bit about that. We're going to talk about the Biden situation, Axelrod Carvel. I also want to talk about Bronny James, as I mentioned I would do yesterday. And so I'm going to dive into that story. Also encourage you right off the top, go read the column that I wrote at OutKick, several thousand words, a deep dive on how has left-wing media gotten so much wrong from COVID all the way through Joe Biden's health. All of that, I believe, you will enjoy. I'm going to share it again at the end of the afternoon, but you can just type in my name, Clay Travis, and OutKick, and it'll boom, pop up as the story at the top of that feed. But I want to tell you, Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. With Prize Picks, you against the numbers. All you do, pick more or less 2 to 6 player stat projections. Watch your winnings roll in. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks. As little as 4 correct picks, that's all it takes. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Finals are over. Basketball action hasn't stopped, though. You got women's basketball. You can get ready for the Olympics. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese. Also, soccer going on and Major League Baseball. I love Major League Baseball, particularly watching the Atlanta Braves. Got a nice win last night, 5-4 in the 11th inning. I want you to download the Prize Picks app today. Use my code OutKick for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code OutKick on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. You'll be glad that you did it. All right, right off the top, I want to talk about something that I haven't heard a lot of people discuss, but I want to contextualize this for all of you. I am a history nerd. I love American history. I majored in American history in college, minored in creative writing, by the way, went to law school, which in many ways is just an extension of history because all you do is read cases historically and try to apply them to the present day. Loved going to law school, met my wife there. Belated happy birthday to Laura, who had her birthday yesterday. We had a good dinner, went out with a bunch of friends. But I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this. So let me take you back in time. 1997. I am a freshman at George Washington University. I have a subscription to the Washington Post. I come back after my first semester, January 1998. I walk downstairs to the dorm, first floor, pick up my newspaper, which was delivered right there at the front lobby. On the front page is the story about Bill Clinton having an alleged affair with an intern, Monica Lewinsky. From that point forward, impeachment, all of the chaos that follows there. I went and watched the impeachment hearings. You could go as a member of the public. I was a student, very interested in history. I went and watched the debates in the House Judiciary Committee, all of that process. I was fascinated by it. Wasn't actually that important relative to the overall safety and security of Bill Clinton or me or any of you that were alive then as it pertains to the United States. That is, if you think about it now in the historical context under which it occurred, the idea that Bill Clinton had an affair with an intern didn't really impact his ability to be president of the United States and do a good job while he was president. Now, some of you out there can rightly say, well, he's the president of the United States. He's held to a higher standard when it comes to his behavior. You might say, hey, a 40-something-year-old guy with a 20-something-year-old girl who was his intern is inappropriate. That should never happen. Oh, by the way, this is pre-Me Too. All those things are arguments that you can make. What I'm focused on is There was an argument that Bill Clinton shouldn't be able to remain president of the United States because he had an affair with an intern, lied about it, all of that ensuing chaos. In retrospect, the American public didn't care. And Clinton went on to finish his term, and I think Bill Clinton was a pretty good two-term president. In fact, I would argue that in my life, the two best two-term presidents were Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. Some of you will agree, some of you will disagree. Maybe some of you like George W. Bush, maybe some of you like Obama. I would say the two best two-term presidents were Reagan and Clinton in my life. 80s pretty awesome, 90s pretty awesome. I think it had something to do with the presidents that we had in office at the time. And by the way, when they finished their terms, they would have won additional terms if they had been able to run. Even though Reagan was old, and even though Clinton had his scandals, Clinton, I believe, would have beaten George W. Bush. I think Reagan, certainly, when his vice president was elected, that's, in effect, a stamp of approval of them. Reason why I bring this up. Richard Nixon, forced to leave the White House over Watergate, which was a stupid, not very successful, almost no benefit gained robbery of the Watergate apartment complex, business complex, right down the street from where I lived in Washington, D.C., too. Clinton with Monica Lewinsky, Nixon with Watergate. The two biggest scandals that probably you would point to of a president in anyone who is watching or listening right now's life. Joe Biden's health is a far bigger story and a far potentially more significant criminal enterprise than anything involving Watergate or anything involving Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. I'm surprised that I don't hear anybody talking about this. And you say, okay, what do you mean by that, Clay? Joe Biden and the cover-up of his health goes directly to whether he can do the job of president of the United States or not. When you are lying about Biden's health, you're not lying about a break-in and Watergate. You're not lying about who or who did not give a blowjob to the president of the United States. Neither one of those things directly impacts Nixon or Clinton's ability to be president of the United States. In fact, I wish we could wave a magic wand right now and put either Nixon or Clinton in the White House right now, because I think they would do an infinitely better job than Biden. What we are talking about right now is potentially the largest criminal cover-up of a crime to ever occur in any of our lives relating to the president of the United States. And I didn't even get into the Trump stuff, but the Trump stuff is nothing compared to what is going on with Biden. How in the world is this not a bigger story than even it is, and it's a big story? What's going on with Biden's health? Why was there a Parkinson's expert who visited 8 straight months the White House in the morning hours and I believe was involved in helping to treat Joe Biden? Why is the entire apparatus that tried to pretend Joe Biden was healthy until that entire argument collapsed surrounding the debate on June 27th? Why isn't everybody asking the question that Fred Thompson asked during the Watergate hearings? Who knew and when did they know it? Who knew when Joe Biden was diagnosed with severe health-related issues, and when did they know it? And by the way, the word diagnose can't turn into the Bill Clinton, that depends on what the definition of is. Because I suspect that lawyers are now involved with Joe Biden's medical conditions, and they're trying to avoid an official diagnosis because then it requires a knowledge associated with his medical condition. I suspect that right now they are trying to treat his symptoms while avoiding acknowledging what is causing those symptoms and officially diagnosing him for what is going on there. I suspect that's what's at play right now. Karine Jean-Pierre. So this is a big story, okay? This is bigger than Clinton and the blowjobs with Monica Lewinsky. This is bigger than Richard Nixon and Watergate. This is bigger than anything alleged or relating or proven that happened with Trump. This is the biggest potential criminal cover-up of a presidential-related issue that goes directly to whether the president can do the job or not that has ever occurred in anyone's life probably watching or listening to this, unless you were alive when FDR was president of the United States and died back in Georgia. Was it Warm Springs, Georgia, in all the way back in, was it 1945, if I remember correctly? Unless you were alive then, and most of you were not, then this is the biggest presidential criminal scandal that I believe we have potentially ever seen in any of our lives. All right. Right now, as I am speaking to you, Karine Jean-Pierre is trying to answer questions. One of the big situations that's in play here right now is the Biden White House hired people who were not qualified for jobs based on what they looked like or what their identity was. Karine Jean-Pierre is the White House spokesperson because she is black, lesbian, and a woman. If she were not probably all three of those things, she would never have gotten the White House press spokesperson job. She is getting obliterated in her job yesterday, many days, but yesterday for sure, and today as well, because she's not very good at responding to questions. Now, even the greatest White House press secretary of all time would have a great deal of difficulty handling the fact that there is probably a dementia patient in the White House right now, and the press is aware that they have been being lied to about it. So they're taking out their frustrations over their humiliation on Karine Jean-Pierre. But the fact that she is the diversity hire that is trying to cover for Joe Biden is a little bit delicious, as is the fact that Joe Biden is now arguing he can't be removed from his position and as the Democrat nominee because it would be an attack on democracy if they did so. To say nothing of the fact that Kamala Harris's political career is probably going to end at vice president because an old white guy who isn't able to still do the job is refusing to allow her to ascend to the next highest rung. That in and of itself is pretty crazy. But what I want to hit on top of associated with this, as it pertains to the Karine Jean-Pierre situation, is this is what I wrote about today. And I would encourage you, some people say you don't write as much as you used to. That's true. I've got a lot of things going on. But I wrote, for those of you out there who want to read what I think and you don't want to hear it, you don't want to watch it, I probably wrote 4,000 words looking at how did the mainstream media, Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, how did they get everything wrong on COVID? And how have they followed it up with everything wrong on the Hunter Biden laptop and now everything wrong on the Joe Biden health situation? And I think it's fascinating. My thesis in that piece is that the wrong people were right. And I use as an analogy in there from the COVID era. Imagine that you had to choose to either follow the guidance of your average clerk, cashier, working at a Dollar General store in a small town in a red state in America, or you had to follow the guidance of a New York Times reporter living in New York City. Who handled COVID better? I would submit to you that the Dollar General clerk had a more rational, realistic, reasonable response to COVID than what was going on with the New York Times. I would also submit to you that the average working person out there had a better sense of what was going on with Joe Biden than a New York Times reporter did, at least based on their public profile. Why did that happen? The analogy I end with is this. Left-wing media is broken But it isn't impossible to fix. It's just that there isn't a desire to fix it at all. And I use as an analogy airplanes. I just finished a big oral history book of 9/11. I think it's called All the Planes in the Sky. I don't have the book beside me right now, but it's basically an oral history of that entire 9/11 era, meaning the few days before, everything that happened, the Pentagon attack, the two trade centers, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, all of that. It's a great read. It's now been 20 some odd years. College kids today are graduating who were born after 9/11. It might as well be the Vietnam War to them. And so I'm reading about it, and what I just kept coming back to is every time there is a plane crash, whether it's caused by terrorists, whether it's caused by someone else, they go and they do a deep investigation. They go get the black box, and they figure out what went wrong on the airplane. There isn't a lot of sitting around and pointing fingers. There is an understanding that airplane travel is dangerous and that a lot of things can go wrong with an airplane. And that whenever something does go wrong with an airplane, we should go back and basically figure out what caused that plane to crash and make sure that we take into position all of the best practices and learn from why that airplane went down. This is one of, I would say, the best things that we do in America. In my lifetime, flying in an airplane has gotten drastically safer. When I was a kid in the 1980s, airplanes went down far more frequently than they go down now in the 2020s. Air travel itself, in the 2 generations that I've been alive, has gone from safe to almost completely safe. That's because when we have errors, we figure out what went wrong and we try to address it. Why doesn't the same thing happen in media? If I ran the Washington Post, and after Donald Trump got elected in 2016, we put at the top of the newspaper, "Democracy dies in darkness." And then we had gotten Russia collusion wrong. We had gotten the Steele dossier wrong. We'd gotten the Mueller report and what we expected it to say wrong. We got the Hunter Biden laptop wrong. We got everything related to COVID wrong. And by the way, you could say this for the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or MSNBC. But I'm just using this as an example because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Got everything COVID wrong. And then it also turned out we got everything relating to Joe Biden's actual mental and physical health wrong. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. It wouldn't have taken all of those things being wrong for me to have trouble sleeping. I would have said, this is unacceptable. Now, I ran OutKick until 2021. OutKick has gotten really big. I saw recently some data that of quote-unquote conservative websites on the internet, foxnews.com is number 1, and I think OutKick was number 3 in terms of total audience, described as conservative. Now, maybe we're like 4, Wall Street Journal, New York Post. We were like OutKick is now like the number 4 biggest conservative outlet in the entire country. We're one of the 10 biggest sports sites, however you want to classify. We're big, okay? If we had gotten the things wrong that the Washington Post had gotten wrong, when I founded and owned OutKick, I would have been unable to sleep at night. By the way, it's been about 13 years ago that I founded OutKick. I founded OutKick in the summer of 2011 at SEC Media Days. So OutKick is about 13 years old. I wouldn't have been able to sleep. I don't know how Jeff Bezos sleeps, given how much he's gotten wrong with the Washington Post. But if we had gotten all that wrong, why not do a deep dive on how we came to get all of those stories wrong if we actually cared about getting them right and putting in place new processes to allow things that we got wrong to not be the same error anymore? Wouldn't that be a rational way that you would respond using, arguably, the most successful example ever that is airplanes, as a way to go look and say, hey, how did we miss on COVID? How do we get masks wrong? How do we get social distancing wrong? How do we get shutting down schools wrong? How do we get essential and non-essential businesses wrong? How do we get COVID shot mandates wrong? How did we get what the COVID shot was going to do wrong? How did we get the Hunter Biden laptop story wrong? How did we miss on Joe Biden's health? If you get every major story wrong, and I mean on a factual basis, I don't mean just like, hey, somebody has the opinion that this should happen and that opinion ends up looking ridiculous. I mean actually get your reporting wrong. Wouldn't you want to dive in and actually do a deep dive to address that and solve it once and for all? I would. And I don't understand why that has still not happened. Okay, sports news. Bronny James. Bronny James was drafted 55th overall in the second round of the NBA draft right before July 4th holiday. So I have not reacted to this happening. The fact that, and I saw all the coverage of this, the fact that media tried to defend Bronny James being drafted is the single most pathetic NBA-related coverage that I have seen in some time. Because what it represents is people are afraid of LeBron James, they're afraid of Rich Paul, and they won't point out what is the indisputable truth. This is wrong. Okay? It is nepotism. It is wrong for someone who is not as talented as someone else to get a job because of who their dad or mom is. Now, some people came out and they said, well, this has been going on for a long time. Okay. Just because it's been going on for a long time in other industries doesn't mean it's good for sports to do it as well. To my knowledge, I cannot think of anyone's son ever being drafted that would have otherwise had a 0% chance of being drafted in the history of sports. Sometimes brothers, like Giannis's brother evidently got drafted, although I would point out that I think Giannis's brother is like 6'7" or 6'8" and a pretty good athlete. Bronny James is 6'1", wildly undersized to play the guard position in the NBA by and large. He is not a starter last year on Southern Cal's team. He averaged 4 points a game, and he had a serious heart condition that required him to be hospitalized and threatened his life. I'm glad he's okay. The fact that he got drafted is indefensible by anyone that has a functional brain. Yet I saw all of the usual suspects, the Wojs of the world, for instance, trotting out there and trying to defend this. It's indefensible. Then, as if that were not enough, he got a guaranteed multi-million-dollar contract. Look, LeBron is rich. If LeBron wants to hire his son to work as one of the agent representatives for him, I get it. We've never seen anyone demand that their son, who is otherwise not qualified enough to be a professional athlete, get drafted because of the talents of their dad. It's everything that's wrong with nepotism in general. Now, it is true that sometimes the person who owns the company decides to put their kids to work at the company. Usually, they don't give them one of the biggest jobs at the company off the start. In other words, they don't pay them millions of dollars. Usually that doesn't happen. But if you own the company, one of the benefits of owning the company is that you get to decide who works at the company. Generally speaking, that is not the best way to hire. Usually the best way you should hire is through the meritocracy. The fact that Bronny James is hired at all and that the ESPNs of the world are bending over and pretending this is Ken Griffey and Ken Griffey Sr. is crazy, Jr. and Sr. Ken Griffey Jr. was one of the best baseball players in America. He was way better than his dad. That wasn't fake when they ended up on the same team. This is a fake storyline. Bronny James, if his name was anything other than James, and if his dad was anybody other than LeBron, would not have been drafted this year. Heck, I'm not sure USC would have even given him a scholarship if his last name was Smith and if he hadn't gone to a rich private high school and gotten a ton of attention. Why? Because he's only 6'1". He's not very good. And I say this as a dad of 3 boys. When I sent out a tweet about this, my 13-year-old, just finished 7th grade, came to me and he said, I think you're being too hard on Bronny, Dad. I've got 3 boys. One day, one of them may work at one of my companies. But I'm not going to immediately name him CEO. And I sat down with my 13-year-old and he said, Dad, if you were a pro athlete, I would love to play on the team with you. I said, Bud, I would love that too. That would be an amazing story. But I wouldn't be doing you any favors as a dad by putting you on a team that you hadn't earned a spot on. Everybody would look at you and question you and treat you differently because they would think that I had skipped you ahead of the line if you had Bronny James's talent and you ended up on my team. LeBron knows this. He's played athletics his whole life. LeBron is not doing his son any favors by elevating him to a job that his talents right now don't support. Maybe 3 years from now, Bronny James could turn into an NBA player if he continued to work at college. Maybe not. Giving him a multi-million-dollar contract, demanding that he get drafted, threatening to punish any other team that drafted him, and then pretending that it all is on the up and up is a straight lie. Media should exist to call out lies like these. Instead, by and large, media exists to try to fluff up people in positions of power to even greater heights. That's the reality. I told my son, hey, I'm not going to put you in a position that you haven't earned. Remember, there is somebody who worked his entire life to try to get drafted in the NBA that would have been a signature achievement of that individual's life that didn't get drafted because Bronny James got elevated above him because of who his dad was. It's wrong. It should be called out. It is indefensible, and it's the antithesis of everything the meritocracy should represent and every reason that we love sports, which is the best man or woman wins, not the best man pretending to be a woman, and not the best man whose dad happens to actually be super rich and can pull strings to make it look like he's one of the best players too. Love all of you. DBAP unless you need to SBAP. I'll hit a bunch of stories tomorrow as well. This has been OutKick, the show.